Good afternoon.
Hello.
Thank you. So let's get started. We're going to talk to you about Python, government, and contracts, and a tool that we're building to investigate corruption. But first, let's go back to 2017, when Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of up to 155 miles per hour. A little less than a week later, 95% of the island had no cell phone service. Less than half of the population had tap water. And 95% of the island was without power. Around a month after, on October 26, 58% still had no cell phone service. 44% still had no water service. And 89% still had no power. And 3 months later, 6.5% still had no cell phone service. 14% still had no water service. And 45% still had no power. That's over 1.5 million people. I'm José Padilla. I'm currently an engineer at Auth0. And on my side time, I kind of work on a project built with Python called fileprevious.io. I've contributed back to a few open source communities and helped maintain projects like PyJWT and Django REST Framework. I also love bringing people together through meetups and events. Most recently, I've been organizing the Greater Hartford Python Group, DevOps Days Hartford, and the Code for Connecticut Brigade.
Hi, my name is Froilan Irizarry, but you can please call me Froy. I am currently working at GitHub as a services engineer. I've also been involved with open source, primarily with teams such as code.gov, PyJWT, and Startups of Puerto Rico. I'm still involved with meetups back home, specifically the Full Stack Nights. I'm a member of the Code for DC, Code for America Brigade, and used to be a captain in Code for Puerto Rico. So, the Maria Tech Brigade was born out of desperation from people in the Puerto Rican diaspora. It really came out and started when a couple of friends and I were trying to calm each other and console each other about our families when suddenly someone said, F this, let's just do something. In about 2 to 3 weeks, we were 300 strong, and we started working on a number of civic tech projects to try to give some sort of tech relief to entities that were already working with the traditional relief efforts that happened during a disaster. At this moment was when José and I started working together in our first civic tech related project, even though we've been involved with different community projects in Puerto Rico for the last, couple of years.
I decided to work on a way to enhance the Puerto Rico government status website called Status PR. This website would show the current states of important services after the hurricane, such as power generation, water treatment, medical services, public transportation, and a couple more. But I still felt that a key metric was missing. There was no way to know what progress meant from these numbers. So seeing that, I decided to scrape their website every hour and kind of graph the historical data. You can say that this was my aha moment, the moment that I knew that I should be using my technical know-how to kind of help my fellow citizens and keep government honest.
So why exactly are we talking, we're still talking about what happened 2 years ago? Well, frankly speaking, we're still dealing with the consequences of this hurricane and the consequences of the mismanagement of this disaster. But we are here specifically to talk about suspicious contracts. So the Puerto Rican Power Authority, or PREPA as it's known, is going to be our central topic here. And they've had a number of these suspicious contracts over the span of these past 2 years. But we're going to focus on just two. The first one we'll focus on is the Whitefish contract that was awarded by PREPA. It was a $300 million contract to a company of just 2 people from Whitefish, Montana. Now, we can discuss all day if just a 2-person company should have gotten a $300 million contract to help rebuild the entire infrastructure, electrical infrastructure of an island, but that's not really what caught our eye. What really caught our eye and the attention of a lot of people was that this was a no-bid contract. It stipulated that FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency here in the US, had approved it. But FEMA denied any involvement with this contract. On top of all of this, the Puerto Rican government could not audit this contract because it was stipulated in the contract that it couldn't do so. So it couldn't audit what they were doing, where the money went, like how many workers were on there, what were their schedule, etc. So, as you can imagine, this caused pretty big of an uproar back home in Puerto Rico, to the point where the contract was pulled from Whitefish. But regardless on what your opinion is about everything that happened, at the end of the day, the taxpayer was left literally in the dark about why this contract was given, why it was pulled, and what efforts were being made to restore this. So what did the Puerto Rico Power Authority do? Well, it awarded another contract, this time a $200 million contract, to a company called Cobra Acquisitions. But this contract was then followed by a $900 million contract. Cobra Acquisitions was founded during the second quarter of 2017. So this made it even younger than Whitefish, the one that had the $300 million contract. As of October 31st, 2017, it had no other storm-related contracts, even though they boasted having over 25 years of experience within their leadership. The deal had a heavy input from FEMA this time, and Cobra had no prior dealings with PREPA. So why is this suspicious today? On September 10th, 2019, a FEMA official in Puerto Rico and the CIO of Cobra were arrested for defrauding the federal government while handling these contracts in Puerto Rico. Another FEMA official, along with the two arrested, have been accused of defrauding the federal government and other things. So, 2 years later, we are still dealing with the consequences of mismanagement and corruption on the island. A year after the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, José and I were made aware of the site of the Comptroller of Puerto Rico. This website would publish every single contract made by government entities to either other government entities or contractors within the island. So seeing what had happened in the past year, José and I knew that we had to look into this and see what was going on. And here's the site. This is the Comptroller site. There are a couple of things that we don't like about this. In our opinion, just having the data available is neither open data or usable, right? There's some nuances with government data that a lot of people don't get or don't know how to read. So just throwing the data out there means nothing to most people. Looking at this site, you don't really know anything about when the contract was awarded. And when I mean when the contract was awarded, I'm talking about the fiscal year it was awarded, not the calendar day. Calendar day might not really have consequence, but the fiscal year, when you take everything into account, it does. Their search is really rudimentary at best, and it also assumes that you know what you're going to search for, right? So it has no real API, so the data isn't really easily consumable. If you want to use this site, like investigators, journalists, etc., you have to just randomly search something and just start clicking their pagination to see what you can find. So at the end of the day, the people that need to consume this need to invest a lot of time just going over it, let alone trying to develop something that can consume this data. The most important part, though, the documents that are the actual contracts are sometimes not on this site. We can only guess as to why. We think it's because they need to go through some redaction process. But basically, if you do want to see a contract, the actual documents in the contract, you have to click the button to download it if it's available. If it's not available, then some magical gnome somewhere gets a petition and gets those documents and puts them on the site. Thing is, the text in these documents is not indexed anywhere on the site either. So if you are a journalist and you're investigating and you want to go through all these documents, you have to download every single one before you actually search for anything usable. To their credit, all these documents are available there. So this is where we saw an opportunity. We thought it would be helpful to have all this data indexed and searchable on one same site. We also thought it would be useful to have those documents indexed and searchable on the site as well, and not just the document, like just the document name, the content of the document, make it searchable. We wanted to help the people that are safeguarding us from corruption and from fraud, namely citizens interested in their government and journalists. So Contratos PR was born. Now, thankfully, we do have places where we can take inspiration from. The digital services efforts, both in the US and the UK, have thrown out websites like usspending.gov, which really helps us kind of be in the frame of mind of how we are going to expose this data and ideas as to how to present it. So this is Contratos PR. So when you first visit our site, we don't assume that you know what you're looking for. We assume that you want to be in some sort of discovery mode. So what we do is that we present data to you from the start. And we also give you the first insight of the site, which is right at the top before the search bar. We say the amount of contracts and the total amount of money awarded per fiscal year. And that kind of blows people's minds because it says oh wow, 2019 that is just the fiscal year. So it kind of helps you frame what year you want to search for. As I said, government data can sometimes be hard. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you may not understand certain things. For example, what's an entity? An entity can be anything. What's a service? Service can be anything. So we decided to create our own visualizations that help you actually try to understand this data without you having to deep dive into it. So we've implemented some visualizations that will help you see what's happened over time, what's happened over certain categories. So at a glance, if you do see something really weird, then you can decide into jumping into this data.
Okay, so why Python and Django? We're Pygothon, so let's talk about some Python. The power and batteries included philosophy of Django really enables us to get this running quickly. We've been working it on and off on our free time for almost a year now, but this lets us hyper-focus on our project goals instead of having to, write our own frameworks now. Django's built-in support for full-text search with Postgres database actually provides us some flexible search functionality within our main database instead of using something more complex or expensive as Elasticsearch. A big part of our effort is to get the actual contract documents and index their content. Some of these contracts, like Froilan said, are not published on the Comptroller sites until they're actually petitioned by a human being. It seems to us that they probably have a manual process that they need to redact sensitive information before actually uploading these documents to their sites. So we've implemented some Django admin actions that we can easily submit a request to send, go to our site and put your email address and have them start the process to submit this missing contract documents. And just like with the batteries included philosophy, a great ecosystem of third-party extensions that exist within Python allow us to minimize the amount of wheels we reinvent. We're using Django REST Framework for our REST API. It provides support for many of the features our API will need: filtering, pagination, throttling, authentication, you name it. Django REST Framework also supports the Open API schema, which means that we can easily generate documentation and client libraries. And although we're not data scientists, we know that Python has one of, if not the strongest, data science community that really sealed the deal for us. The Comptroller site provides all this information with no real insights or tools to visualize it. And we want to help our users formulate their own questions and see what is possible with all this data. This is why we've worked on creating our own visualizations and strived not to recreate the experience of the Comptroller site. So for example, here we have spending by year, we have categorization by services, and the entities involved within this contractor. You can also see the contracts that this contractor has been awarded and the total amount of money. We've also started to work around on our own trend section, which is still in its early stages, but from here we plan to provide more insights and experimentation with all this data. And last but not least, the community. The attention to the detail the Python community gives to things that matter to humans is really refreshing to us. So we have two main projects. At the start, we just had our Django project, and we later started to think about who would be using this project. We wanted to give other people a chance to come up with interesting ways to display and visualize all this data. We have our ideas on what we want to do and show our intended audiences, but we didn't really want to push this to others. And another big reason was separation of concerns. To us, the API should not be concerned with which client is calling. And the same goes for our front end. This gives us the opportunity to kind of work simultaneously and in parallel and even deploy these projects like the same way, right? So we split our project into two. Our REST API, which is built on top of amazing open source projects, Django, Django REST Framework, obviously Python, Redis, Celery, Docker, and Postgres. And since we're already building an API for others, we wanted to build a front end that actually used that API. We ended up using something called Next.js, which allows us to use a lot of the great work already being done in the React ecosystem without the significant overhead of deciding on how to set up Webpack. For me, one of the most interesting parts of this project since the beginning was how early we had to optimize for the amount of data that we were actually pulling in. And having done the whole scraping HTML thing before, I knew I wanted to avoid that. So after some initial inspection, their site had some endpoints that returned JSON sometimes. Sometimes it returned HTML, but that's fine. So that was actually one less thing to worry about. But we still had to work. We had to still work around some other weird issues. So for example, like if you go to their site and you search for something and you go to the last page, it would error out and kind of time out. So I think they have some misfunctioning pagination. And when I actually built our first script to pull all this data, we intended it to be fast because we knew we had almost 1 million contracts and other more data that we needed to download. But happens that fast actually affected the Comptroller site's availability. So to be good citizens, we would it cost no harm. We needed to self-throttle. And part of that solution was just to get less total pages per request by filtering the data even more. But this presented another issue. Now we have more requests to do. And it just increases the collection times, right? The last time we collected all the data, it took around 24 hours. Part of that initial script was a couple of Celery tasks that I had envisioned would allow distributing all this load to many workers, but we were not able to do that since we were affecting their availability. Using Celery, we actually ended up with a mechanism to retry tasks that failed because of timeouts and page disruptions. So that was very helpful. Now, let's talk about a little bit of that collection pipeline. We started collecting data from their site. And like I said, we have to do this over and over again when we want updates. We'll definitely, hopefully, work on making that a little bit more efficient by only downloading what we actually don't have. Second, we normalize and augment contracts with amendments and contractor data. We store that normalized data in our local Postgres database. Then we download all contract documents to safeguard against corruption affecting their availability. This actually allows us to embed the documents themselves in our contract view without having to really care about what the format is for that file. Last, we extract the text from the downloaded documents and index them using Postgres.
All right, so I think we've both mentioned a couple of times that open source and community is important to us, but saying so doesn't make it happen. So what are we doing? Well, from the community aspect, we really do love community. So to make our project a bit more accessible, we've created what you would expect, the contributing.md, the readme.md, which is the basics. But we've also set up in spectrum.chat, a place where whoever's interested can come talk to us and try to create a community around that. We've also implemented GitHub Actions that if you're a first-time contributor, it'll give you a welcome to the project and say, we'll be with you soon. The contributor experience was also pretty important for us. So we kind of recognize that this project is sometimes difficult to set up and maybe intimidating for especially new developers. So we invested a lot of time in using Docker to try to abstract all that getting up and started. We're also developing a setup script to abstract even farther than that, so you don't even have to know how to set up Docker or how to make it run, because we think this is very important. And transparency. So the reason why we started this project was a preoccupation with transparency. So what are we doing about it? So right now we are considering different ways to make our scraping logs available to people so that whoever wants to see that we're really not fudging the data or doing something weird with it, they can at least go through logs and see when we extracted things and that it's actually what's on the site. Another thing is we're talking about contracts, that means money. So we thought we should also post our financial state for this project, how much money it's taken and what we're doing with it. And we will be adding that to the repo pretty soon. On the financial sustainability, we are currently paying it for ourselves. It's a bit less than $60 US a month, which for us isn't prohibitive, but we do still want to consider any sort of funding that we could achieve with the community, and we're considering different platforms such as Open Collective, GitHub sponsors, etc.
So what's next? We want to actually finally download all the contract documents. All the almost million of contracts that are on their site don't have documents yet, but we're hoping to download all the ones that are available. And as mentioned before, we're not data scientists, but we would definitely like to offer additional insights to our users and probably reaching out to more people in the data science community to kind of help us make sense of some of this data. We would also like to augment contract data from the Department of State's Registry of Corporation and Entities to include information on officers, business addresses, and registration dates. This would allow some interesting correlation between actual contracts. We'll also be interviewing some more journalists from Puerto Rico to understand what their pain points are and how we can keep helping them with integrations through tech. And although we started this project thinking of Puerto Rico, we believe that it could be useful in other jurisdictions. We'd love to engage with anybody that has feedback that would like to contribute to this project. Community is really important to us, after all.
So while doing this project, Puerto Rico went through a series of protests that ousted a corrupt governor and his cabinet. This has really reinforced our opinion that we, the citizens, need to also audit our government and our elected officials. We would also like to invite you all to consider this and maybe even join us with either opinions, questions, or I don't know, maybe even a pull request. Gracias.